Reddit Ask Me Anything. I am a 92-year-old German-born Jew who grew up in the Hitler Youth and was forced to fight in World War II in the German anti-tank division. I deserted and became a POW in a British camp and eventually moved to Canada in 1955. Just recently, I published a memoir of my life. Ask Me Anything. I was born in 1927 in Jena, Germany. To quote from my memoir, I am a survivor of Nazi Germany during World War II. During my childhood I had to live two lives, a false public one as a loyal Nazi and my true one at home as a Jewish child in an anti-fascist family. Though both of my legal parents were German citizens, my biological father was Jewish. My family was always very open and accepting of others, and did not support fascism, but did what they needed to survive. During World War II, we kept my heritage a secret. As a result, I was raised in the Hitler Youth and trained as an anti-aircraft soldier. I was quite tall and desirable to the SS, but I had no interest in becoming one of them. So I volunteered to be in the anti-tank division once I was old enough to enlist. Though I fought as a German, I never believed in the war and waited for an opportunity to desert. When I was 17, a group of like-minded soldiers and I deserted and became POW in a British camp for 7 months. When the war ended, I returned to the secret family business of smuggling. The economic depression post WW2 created an opportunity for my family to make money by illegally importing goods from surrounding countries. For example, women's stockings from France. During this time I married my wife and had my first daughter. Did your German background make it any more difficult to obtain a job after moving to Canada? I was told by Emigration, a Jewish Czech lady, to say I was Austrian or Swiss because openly saying I was German would make it impossible for me to get a job. There was a lot of prejudice against German people at that time regardless of their thoughts on the war. Ro, you have led a full life. At 92, what are your goals for the future? Right now I'm learning how to use the internet and writing a book of short stories from my life that didn't make it into the memoir. Very cool, sir. Sometimes the side stories are just as good or better. What small piece of advice could you give a 50-year youngster? Travel the world, immerse yourself in other cultures and try to understand them. That's the best school, and keep an open mind. How did you feel about being in the Hitler Youth as Jewish person? Were the people around you openly anti-Semitic? Oh yeah, the majority of people were, especially the younger ones. It was like they were brainwashed into wanting to kill the Jews. What was your reaction when the war ended and the Holocaust evidence surfaced? Did you hear any stories about the concentration camps while you were fighting? Right from the beginning of Hitler's power, concentration camps were being built. We knew because our neighbors were arrested for being communist. They returned a year later and secretly told us what they had learned. We always had an idea of what was going on. Do you have any friends that are as old as you are? Greetings from Germany. No, unfortunately they have all passed away. Ein gutes neues Jahr und sei gesund. What was the most stressful experience for you and your family when they were hiding your being Jewish? Personally, I was never afraid. I was very strong from my Oma's teachings about God. If you are good, bad things won't happen to you. However, when my biological father was arrested and executed, it was a very painful experience for everyone. Was your mom also Jewish? I thought you can only be considered a Jew if your mom is one. From what I understand, the Nazi German state had a pretty intense propaganda campaign. What are some things that you later found out the state had lied about? Is there anything that you believe only the Nazi state has told the truth about? We listened to BBC One radio from London and Moscow secretly. If we were caught, we would get charged with high treason. So we always knew what was real news. I was also in the resistance. We shared this information from BBC One with anyone we could through posters during blackout, at night. Amazing. Look forward to reading your memoir. Question. At any point did anyone that was loyal to the fascist party ever become suspicious of you? A family friend who knew I was Jewish was not a loyal fascist but opportunistically blackmailed my parents because they had money goods from smuggling. Aside from that, we were not close to any loyal fascists and I was a very convincing liar. What do you want future generations to know to prevent anything like the Holocaust from ever happening again? Read history. Those who don't want to remember history are condemned to repeat it. Can you tell us more about your time with the anti-tank division? What was it like? We were trained to have 2 bazookas on our backs and 1 in our hands. We were trained to elbow crawl through enemy lines and destroy as many tanks as possible at nighttime. I was going to be deployed on what was essentially a suicide mission, so I intentionally smashed my foot with a boulder so I would be sent to a field hospital instead. Were there instances where you were close to being exposed as Jewish? Did you meet anyone else who was in the same situation? A family friend who knew I was Jewish was not a loyal fascist but opportunistically blackmailed my parents because they had money goods from smuggling. Aside from that, we were not close to any loyal fascists and I was a very convincing liar. I was in the resistance with another guy whose father was also Jewish. Unfortunately, he ended up in a concentration camp. Thank you for this Ask Me Anything. How did you and the other soldiers interested in deserting identify one another? I know the Nazis and other totalitarian governments depend upon dissidents not being able to find one another. We spent a lot of time together in a field hospital. We were all injured and got to know each other quite well. We swapped stories of what had happened to us during the Nazi reign. The 3 others I deserted with were all German Polish descent, so they were forcefully taken from Poland to join the German army. You seem to have held a number of different jobs. As someone who's nearly 30, I find it difficult to know what I want to do. Does that feeling ever go away? Is there any job that you have held that you really enjoyed, and what was your least favorite job role you have had? Reforestation was my favorite job because I was doing something good and it was peaceful. My least favorite job was working 25 years in wood fiber because I had no other choice and it was very mindless work. That being said, the money was good and it put food on the table for my family. Also, it gave me a good pension. My dream job would have been becoming an independent candy maker like my father, but that was not an option for me. From your own experience, how many % of your fellow soldiers believed in the Nazi cause? How many % were like you, just biding their time? And how many % were apathetic? It was very difficult to determine this because everyone was very silent for their own safety. You would only learn this sort of information if you were very close friends. Sometimes you could tell by how they talked about the war. In my opinion, it may have been around 50/50 people who were fascists at heart versus those who were at least undecided. Since you're learning how to use the internet now, what's your favorite thing you've discovered thus far? Except for Reddit. First off, I introduced him to Reddit, and he has not used it besides this, so he might come to really enjoy it given some time. Fun fact, he got tendinitis from using Facebook on his Kindle so much. As for me, before I used it I thought it ruined family life since they were always on their phones. But now I am using it, I have to be careful not be addicted to it since the world is so open. Google Earth has been my favorite so far since I can see so many different things. How was life once the British got you? Any mistreatment? How long were you in prison and what was the atmosphere within others' pals there? First of all, we were treated amazingly well by the British. When we deserted, the first thing they offered us was a cup of tea and Woodbine cigarette. The fellow who took me prisoner was 19 years old from Liverpool and showed me his family pictures and told me the war was over for me. In the camp itself, food was scarce, even for the British, but they were fair and did their best. I was in the camp for 7 months. I had a good relationship with other powers. On my 18th birthday they all banded together to get me an extra ration of bread. Took small bits of tobacco they had to make me a cigar, and one, with the help of a guard, got me a blooming thistle in the no man's land between fences keeping us in the camp. Who did you remarry and how did you meet? My son met my wife, before I met her, at a retreat on the coast. I was initially not willing to meet her. I had sworn off women after a series of ill-fated relationships after my first wife passed, but he insisted. My son was also trying to get her to meet me. At one point she called the house trying to reach my son. I answered and we ended up having an hour-and-a-half long conversation. I drove down the next day to meet her and the rest is history. Of all the things in Nazi Germany, what was hardest? Pretending I was a loyal Nazi. Did you know Franz Stigler? Also, what was it like in Nazi Germany? No, I did not. Nazi Germany was fine for anyone who followed what the Nazis wanted. You were quite well off actually. However, if you did not blindly follow, you ended up on the shit list and lived a much more difficult life. My parents lived in Holland during the occupation and had vivid memories of the time. How did the average German feel about occupying their neighbors at the time? Opinions were mixed. My family felt very bad because of my connections to the Netherlands. My Oma was from Gelderland. I think the majority of Germans, at least Western Germans, felt that the Dutch were our friends. We shared many traditions and culture, so there was much sympathy over German occupation. What was the reaction of German officials to youth who did not want to participate in the Hitler Youth? Everyone had to go. No questions. Officials would go after your parents and they would go through heavy questioning. If you or your parents questioned Nazi reign in any way, they would disappear. The propaganda was so powerful for some youth that parents were afraid of their own children. Many children raised in the Hitler Youth turned in their parents for not being faithful to the Nazi party. Thank you for doing this Ask Me Anything. What do you think about the people who deny that the Holocaust ever happened? For me, it's almost impossible to comprehend that we have so much evidence that the Holocaust exists and people manage to deny it. Historical documentaries always show Hitler as an immensely popular figure in Germany at the time. Was the average German really as fanatical about the Reich as depicted, or was it more a political uprising brought on by those with power and money? The industrialists, big business guys, sided with Hitler because they were scared of communism, which would destroy their businesses. The Christian churches also sided with Hitler because communism was a common enemy. The poor and unemployed approved of Hitler because he created policies that gave them food and other basic necessities in a dire time. The Depression. Youth who were brought up in the Hitler Youth propaganda were fanatical. They were empowered by the Nazi state and repressed those who were less than absolutely supportive of fascism. Many older people, above school age, were a little more critical of the Nazi state. But of course you had to be quiet about this. Many Germans were very bitter about the Treaty of Versailles, so Hitler was also a good channel for that anger. Some people were supportive of Hitler's desire to promote Germany until the war became reality. What was Germany like under Allied occupation? It was very good when I returned from the POW camp and saw Germany. You could feel the peacefulness and friendship. A lot of people broke their silence at this point and felt comfortable sharing that they had not been fully on board with Nazi policies. Thank you for sharing your story with us. What was it like being in the Hitler Jugend? In school they tell you some things, but I would be very interested in hearing your experience. I felt like the only one who knew the truth but couldn't speak because they were pushing the idea of the super race and antisemitism. Aside from the propaganda, they taught us many useful life skills. For example, Morse code, which I can still use today. I enjoyed the sports, camping, survival training, and whatnot. It was kind of like Boy Scouts, but with a propaganda agenda. After all this, what is the most important message you can give to people who live in a dysfunctional world? It depends on your situation. For example, if you're living under a dictator, you have to do what you must to survive. If you have better circumstances, learning from others is the key. Get to know people around you and keep an open mind. How do you feel anytime you hear a contemporary public figure get compared to Hitler? When a public figure speaks a certain way, unforgiving, advocating cruelty, it does remind me of Hitler, but many people use the comparison too loosely. Hitler was a very cruel person, and if people want to really understand his methods of leadership, they should read history. What are your favorite lessons you've learned in life? See people as they are, not as what you want them to be. Who was the bravest person you ever knew and why? Ernst Thielmann. He was the leader of the German Communist Party and was arrested in 1933, spending the whole time in concentration camps. He was executed last minute before the Allies liberated the camp in 1945. Do you have any connections to Germany today? Was it a tough decision to emigrate? Do you have any opinions on the state of Germany today? I have visited Germany quite often and have family there. Leaving was not easy, money was tight, but I have always felt more at home in Canadian culture. Germany is a great country and I'm happy that most of the hatred is gone. I liked that there were no difficulties crossing borders when traveling thanks to the EU. Germany has outstanding culture. Thank you for sharing your experiences. What was your opinion of other Germans during and after the war? How did you see your neighbors given everything you learned in your life? The majority of people were frightened and sad during the war. They were people I had known my whole life, so they did not change drastically, only as much as they needed to survive. It became well known that a lot of people had been misled by German propaganda about Germany having an excellent standard of living compared to others at the beginning of the war. After the war, people had more freedom of speech. Many were still very patriotic but rejected Nazi reign. They had kind of turned a blind eye. So to summarize, people didn't change, only how vocal they were changed. What were your thoughts about Hitler at the time? He was a dangerous, brutal, insane man. Have you ever been back to Germany, the LGBT in particular? If so, what are your thoughts on the changes that have happened since? Political, economical, society in general. Greetings from a neighboring city of Vienna. I have been back. The standard of living impressed me. The progress they have made is awesome. Unfortunately, due to the dense population, things cannot be as peaceful as it is in Canada. I definitely notice that German people can be fearful of others compared to my experience in Canada. For example, talking to a stranger on the street. Bro, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content. It's free and that's a great price.